Hi, everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a LatinX writers podcast. I'm your host, Ruben Mendive, and today we have a brand new guest here. So I like to start every episode by having my guests introduce themselves. So your name and how you identify for the people at home.
Hello, thank you for having me. This is Jorge Ramirez-Martinez, and I'm a gay drama writer with a flair for twists and turns, thanks to the Mexican telenovelas I grew up watching. My pronouns are he and him.
And so I always like to know where my guests are from. So when people ask you, where are you from? What's the short version? What's the long version?
Well, the short version is I'm from Stockton, California, which is 5 hours north, but originally I'm from Guadalajara. I was born in Guadalajara, and I was raised there until about 3 years of age. And then I moved to Chicago for about a year before moving to Stockton.
And that's funny because I was born in Mexico City and I moved to Chicago when I was like 3 or 4.
Really, there's a
Yeah.
lot of Mexican immigrants that go to
Yeah.
Chicago. But the reason why my family we still have family there. But the reason why we didn't stay was because it was very cold.
Yes.
My family didn't love the snow and the big city life. And growing up, I would always ask, like, why did we leave Chicago? Like, we're in a small town. I need a big city.
So, like, why did your family leave Mexico and why Chicago and then why eventually Stockton?
Back in the 80s, the American embassy in Guadalajara was just giving out citizenship to the prominent, well-to-do families in Guadalajara. I'm not saying that my family was rich, but, my mom was a nurse. My father had just finished the University of Guadalajara for accounting. And then my grandfather had been a bracero, so he was already a U.S. citizen who was living in Chicago at the time. So my mom got a letter saying, we will love to give you U.S. citizenship. So she was debating whether or not she should take the U.S. citizenship and move with me and my dad to Chicago where my grandfather was. And so she, on a whim, said, I'm going to do it. And so we packed up. We were there for about a year, and she did not like it. She didn't like the snow, the cold, the big city life. And, we moved back to Guadalajara, but my mom was always thinking, I want my children, my son at the time, and she was planning on having more children. She said, I want them to have those opportunities in America. And so my father had family in Stockton, which is a small town. And he said, well, we should move to Stockton. And they decided to move in 1990. And my mom was pregnant with my sister at the time. And so that's how we ended up in America, in Stockton.
Yeah. And how would you describe Stockton to someone that's never been there like myself? Like, what is it like?
In the 90s, Stockton was that picture perfect small town, like Lifetime movie town, But in the beginning of about 2000, 2005 is when it started to get this influx of Bay Area people who were moving there for cheaper housing. And so it was usually those who couldn't afford the homes that got those homes. And then the bubble of the housing market bubble hit in 2009. Forbes magazine declared Stockton the most miserable city in the U.S. because of the housing foreclosure rates and the unemployment rates. So it's two different versions of Stockton that I know.
I'm curious about you growing up there. Like, what was your household like? What did your parents do for a living?
Well, my mom worked at a retirement community with elderly people. My father was in construction, and I was the eldest. Then my sister, who is 4 years younger than me, her name is Sarai, and then my brother Pablo, who is 5 years younger than me. It was just the five of us, plus my uncle who lived with us, my mother's brother. My father worked 2 jobs. He was seldom home, so it was just me and my siblings and my mom mostly. A lot of people don't know that my father was a janitor at night, and so I was forced to work with him because I would stay home and fight with my brother and sister. So my mom's like, You got to go work. I don't want to put up with you fighting with your brother and sister.
Like, did you see yourself as like an immigrant? Like, what was that story like?
I didn't see myself as an immigrant until high school because I didn't know Spanish. I knew it phonetically. I didn't know how to read it or write it. And when I got to high school, I took Spanish. And so I started to learn about the language, the culture. And I was like, wait a minute, like this whole time I thought I was American. But the more I was taught about like the other Los Muertos in Spanish class, the more I like a lot of Mexicans. I'm not Catholic. I was born into the Mormon church and raised Mormon. Like one, I had to straddle those two religions because my father was Catholic and I knew Spanish and English. And then around the high school is when, like I said, it's when I realized that I was, quote, an immigrant to America, despite, being raised there, because a lot of, I don't know if you remember, but those props that were trying to like separate the classrooms and ban like Spanish language teaching. It was around that time where I was like, wait, why, like, how am I not being taught in Spanish when I want to be? And so high school is when I was like, okay, maybe I'm not American like I thought.
Yeah, and so I'm always curious about people during high school. So I always ask people, who were you? Who were you pretending to be? And how do you think other people saw you during that time? So like 14 to 18.
The first 2 years of high school, I was in the easy classes. I wasn't challenged because going back to those props that I'm vaguely remembering, I was put into like the ESL classes without them knowing that I knew English because they just saw my last name and they assumed that I didn't know English and that I was lazy. So they would put me in the ESL classes and the non AP advanced classes, honors courses. So every year I would have to physically go into my guidance counselor's office and say, I think again, my classes are wrong. And so for the first 2 years, I kind of like let that slide and I didn't really do my homework. I didn't have a set path or know what I wanted to do at post high school. And teachers didn't really pay attention to me. And so it wasn't until my sophomore year where a teacher, an English teacher said, wait, you don't belong in this course. You belong in honors and AP courses. You're obviously advanced for my course. And so she walked me down to the guidance counseling office and said, we need to change all his courses. And like within the week, all my classes changed. I was thrown into honors and AP courses, and I had to make up all the summer homework, like read these novels, write an essay. I had never written an essay in my life because, again, I wasn't taught, I wasn't challenged. And so it was this steep learning curve for me in a lot of subjects. And so my last 2 years of high school, I was a bookworm. I was reading, Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, Great Expectations, and learning about history for the first time. Because again, no one said this kid is worth teaching. So my high school is divided into like non-driven and then driven. And so senior year and junior years when I got all A's and B's, coming from being a B, C, sometimes D student. So yeah, those were my high school years.
And so like, what'd you do after high school? Did you have a plan? Did things go according to plan?
After high school, there was two things that happened junior year. Like my favorite movie is Titanic, and that's the movie that got me into storytelling, into opening my eyes to Hollywood and like the magic of cinema. And I always knew in some way, shape, or form I was going to be in Hollywood. And I would tell that to people in high school. They would laugh. My teachers were like, look at me and say, oh, okay. What do you want to do? I'm like, I don't know. Because back then I didn't know what a writer was. I didn't know what a director was or a producer. So junior year of high school, my art history teacher was showing us Son-in-Law with Pauly Shore. So the female lead is Carla Gugino. And I overheard my teacher say something to another student. And she said, oh, that's my cousin. And I overheard that and I was like, wait, who's your cousin? Because I was like, there's no one here. It's like, no, the girl in the movie. I'm like, really? Oh my God. Can I have her autograph? And that's all I said. And then she's like, oh, sure. And then she asked me, she's like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be in Hollywood one day. She's like, okay, well, my cousin did it, and I know you can do it too. Because, as long as you set a path and go forth, there's no reason why you can't achieve what you want to do. And so that was when I was like, okay, what is my way of getting to Hollywood? And that's when I realized like it's through education. So I went to the University of the Pacific, which was across the street from my high school. And I said, okay, well, here I have to get a foundation of film. So I took film and literature as my major. And, I was lucky enough to get a full ride because a math teacher of mine said, okay, well, I've seen how you've grown as a student and I know you'll do great. So here's my last application for a full ride scholarship. And he gave it to me and I filled it out. And I guess, the universe has a way of sending you where you need to be. And so after high school, I ended up in college.
What do you think you were able to build from like your college experience? You sort of had an idea that you wanted to like work in Hollywood and film and television. So like, how did that sort of manifest during those years?
Like the more I learned of film, the more I was exposed to the writing of it. I was like, this is what I'm meant to do. And like little things would just pop up in my path. Like Jamie Lee Curtis went to the University of the Pacific as well. And so did her mom, Janet Lee, who was in Psycho. And they were from Stockton as well. And we had the Janet Lee Theater on campus. And so I would walk by her little shrine they had for her, like her like Oscar dress. And I'm like, if they can make it from Stockton, I can too. And so one day, Jamie Lee Curtis came to campus to promote a children's book. And I just happened to be in front of her and I said, I'm going to be in Hollywood one day. And she looked at me. She's like, oh, okay. Fast forward to my first job on the Paramount lot as a writer. I bumped into her and I told her, I said, I told you one day, like 10 years ago, that I was going to be in Hollywood. And here I am on my first job. And we're both walking into the same building. And she just looked at me. She's like, wow, okay. But also, like, a professor was put in my path, Patty McCarthy, who is a film producer, ex studio executive, and now a film professor over at Whittier College, who really saw me and said, you're a writer. You belong at USC. And she's coming from Los Angeles. And so I thought, oh my God, she's the industry. Everyone on campus was like, okay, we have a film professor who's new, who actually worked at a studio. And so her telling me that I belong in Hollywood, I belong at USC for my master's, I was just in awe. And I looked at her in her office and I said, do you really think I have what it takes to get to USC, to belong in the industry? And she said, yeah. And so that just gave me the fire to go forth and conquer. And, it really just takes one person to believe in you, to give you that, to light that spark under you, to have you go on your path.
And so did you go to USC right after, or did you take a break?
I took a year off and I applied to USC and I worked at a bank and I was waiting to hear back from USC. I actually heard back from USC when I was crossing the border. Isn't that funny? I came down to UCLA. I didn't think I was going to get, to be honest with you, because everyone said it's harder than getting into Harvard Law or Harvard University, and I'm like, okay, I don't think I can do that. But I thought I was going to go to UCLA, and I felt like I was going to get into UCLA, so I applied, came down to LA, had the in-person interview at UCLA, and it was a terrible interview. They chewed me up and spat me out. They're like, what do you want to do? I'm like, I want to do TV. And they're like, okay, well, TV is not where it is. It's in film. And this is in 2009, the golden age of television, as people call it nowadays. And then I said, okay, well, I want to do film and I want to be the showrunner. And then the ladies said, well, actually, to be a showrunner, you have to be in TV, not in movies. I was like, oh, Okay. I knew then and there I was not going to get into UCLA. Interview over. My friend who drove me down from Stockton said, okay, let's go to Tijuana and forget about this, go drinking. So we did. And then we went down to TJ for the day. And when we were coming back, we were crossing the bridge, the border, because we left our car in San Diego. And I called my mom and I said, hey, I'm back in the US, terrible interview at UCLA. I'll be home later tonight. And she said, oh, okay, well, you got a packet here from USC? I can't read it. And then I'm like, oh my God, okay. So I said, okay, put my brother on. And I said, okay, is the USC packet big or is it like a letter? And he said, it's big. I'm like, okay, like, feel it. Is it thick or is it thin? He's like, it feels like there's a binder in here. And I knew then and there I got into USC. And I got home later that night, and sure enough, the packet was on my bed. I opened it, read it, and this is like 11 o'clock at night after driving, about 6, 7 hours from San Diego. And I read it. I was very sleepy, and it said, congratulations, you have been admitted to USC Film School. And I went to bed, and I was like, wow.
Let's talk about your time at USC. Like, because it's like you're going to the film school and it's also you're in a new city. So, like, what was that whole experience like? Just sort of your introduction into this. Like, you're trying to make it in Hollywood. USC Film School is pretty close to like basically doing that. So, like, what was all that like?
I was coming from a small town, and I'm now living in a big city. I was one of 3 Mexican students. Can you believe that? So it was like, okay, these people definitely do not look like me. They don't come from the same background. And I was wide eyed. I was young. I was still maturing. The best way to learn to swim is being thrown into the deep end. And that's what happened at USC. Like, prior to that, I hadn't really picked up a camera. And all my film foundation was critical theory. And so I was scared, to be honest. I was scared of touching a camera. I didn't have a support system. I had to create one. Then, when I realized that it was up to me to make the best of the situation, things started falling into place for me. My learning curve the first year was very steep, but I was able to advance into the other courses. I took a year of sound because I wasn't a techie person back then. I was afraid of technology. I still loved writing checks. I still love holding paper money. And so I made it a mission to really learn a trade that wasn't in my wheelhouse. That I said, okay, if I master this, then I can do anything. And I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, whether I wanted to direct or write or produce, because I came to USC saying I'm going to be a producer. I think I have the mentality for just seeing things and envisioning things and working to bringing them together. What I think I got out of USC is really those skills to make it in Hollywood, learning politics with people, and obviously learning how to the craft of filmmaking. I that was the first time I took a screenwriting course, and I fell in love with it. And while going to USC, I was translating a memoir for an astronaut from Stockton who went to space, and I said, okay, putting on my producing hat, there's a movie there. And so I went to him and I said, let's make a movie about your life. And he said, okay, well, first I need to translate my memoir. And so we made the deal of I will translate the memoir in exchange for getting the first crack at the script. And so that's when I really fell in love with writing, and seeing the book published with my name in the acknowledgement was like, wow, I'm a writer. That was when I hit me. I'm like, I'm a writer.
Could you follow a through line of you as a writer before then? Like, if you sort of look back, do you feel like storytelling was always there for you? Like, can you sort of walk us through that?
Storytelling has always been at the forefront with me. It goes back to watching those Mexican telenovelas that really got me into narrating stories and thinking about them, because my mom was always running around with my brother and my sister. I would be the one glued to the TV. So I would always have to say, okay, this just happened. Then she did this, and then they got into a fight because she was feeding them, bathing them. So I would always have to recap it for her, recap episodes. And so I always had a book in my hand. So reading a lot of stories and just also hearing my grandmother tell me stories of my mom when she was a child and how she would uh, go to school, come back from school, and how they overcame things. So yeah, everywhere where I tuned in, there was always some type of storytelling, and that just gave me a sense of control because as a storyteller, you dictate what happens to the characters and what happens in the stories, and you're basically playing God, which I loved. I loved the power of control.
And so, like, what'd you do after USC? Like, you have this big fancy degree. So, like, what was the plan? And did things go according to plan?
Life happened. I had to take like about 2 years off of pursuing my stepfather got cancer. He was sick and he died, but his 401k was paid out wrong.
Mm.
It was supposed to go to my mom, but it went to his daughter. But he had told my mom, like, that money is yours. And so when his finance company said, oh, you're not getting the money, I was like, there's something wrong. You were told that was your money. He wouldn't lie to you. So while trying to, get that assistant job, I was fighting this finance company. So I spent about 6 months putting together a paper trail, and I ended up putting together about an 86-page PDF that proved that the money was paid out wrong. So I found a lawyer who would not sue, but would write a letter with my 86-page PDF proving my claims. And he said, okay, now that you have a letter from a lawyer with proof that they messed up and they owe your mom the money, you should be fine. This is the end of the road for me. And then that week is when I got an assistant job at a production company/management company. So I'm like, great. Now I'm going to start on my career, the trajectory of assistant, moving on, being a producer or moving into a writer's room. And the end of the first week is when I got a call from my lawyer, and he said, oh, the finance company is not going to pay out the money, even though they know their mistake. And here's my mom having to move out of the house she lived with my stepfather into an apartment, having to sell half of her things just to be able to survive. And I'm like, I just hit a wall. Because, as Latinos, like, we take care of our family. We have that responsibility. At least I feel like I do with my family. And so I walked into my boss's office and said, I don't think I can be here. And he just looked at me. And so I quit that day. That's like a big mistake in people's eyes. But I knew like I was needed by my mom. And so I set out to find a lawyer who would sue. I found one who decided to take on the case. But again, he came back and said, I can't do it because it's not going to be cost effective to sue. So I was just at a crossroads. I was like, what do I do? Do I move back home to help my mom? So at the time I was watching Scandal, and you know how Olivia Pope uses bad PR to get what she wants. So that's what I did. I went on Twitter and I blasted everyone. I blasted the finance company. I blasted his employer. And within 24 hours, they tweeted me back and they said, okay, let's fix this. And they paid out the money without taking taxes to my mom. And this is right at the beginning where Twitter was starting to get some notoriety of like, oh, all you have to do is go on Twitter and they'll like fix things. So yeah, and after that is when I started writing. Like in 2014, I was starting to write again. Now that whole ordeal was done, and the first pilot that I wrote was sort of influenced by that journey of law and stuff, and that got me into the NHMC Writers Program for 2015. And that was the first time where I wrote a drama pilot. And basically, it was like my boot camp.
A lot of the guests I have on this podcast have been part of the NHMC Writers Program. So I'm just curious of like, what do you think that program did for you?
It really threw me into the deep end and made me learn how to swim because we had to pitch write and do a rewrite of our own original pilot in 5 weeks. And I was like, okay, what's a pitch? Like, what's an outline? How does an outline look? And you're being forced to figure it out. They're like, oh, your act outs are not strong. You need to fix them. I'm like, what's an act out? Like, why is it 5 acts? What's a teaser? So it really just threw me into the deep end. And I'm grateful for that because it really was, again, a steep learning curve that made me realize that, oh, I need to learn everything I should have learned, like in a writing MFA program, which I didn't do. I did the film production program at USC. And in doing that, I fell in love with writing.
When was like the moment or time when you felt like, oh, I'm starting to get momentum as like in my career as a writer?
I would say in 2016, I had coffee with Grace Moss from NBC. She was part of the Writers on the Verge program. I invited her to coffee because I hadn't met her during NHMC because she was pregnant. And she said, okay, who are you as a writer? Like, tell me more about you. And she's like, oh my God, I love you. Like, you're great. Keep in touch. And I was like, okay, that was a great meeting. And within the month, she emailed me out of the blue and said, hey, send me your sample. I want to put you up for NBC's Blacklist Redemption. And I was like, okay. I mean, I don't have reps. I don't know how staffing works. And within the week, I was staffed on the show. So I was like, okay, now I am legit a writer in Hollywood. And I called my mom. I walked out of the ND building after meeting with the execs, and they had told me, we want you on the show. You're hired. I walked out, called my mom in Guadalajara. She was on vacation. And I just like, I don't know what to think. I don't know what to do, but cry. Tears of joy.
And I am curious about like moments like that because I think sometimes it's like we see as the story of our life and like the very like montage of like everything it took to get there. So like, what were some of the things that like you had just crossed this finish line, and what were all the things that you were sort of thinking of like that had happened and that you had been through to get there?
Actually, that's what went through my mind, like a movie, like a recap of a telenovela, you know? Interesting little tidbit story that ties into that. So I got staffed late August, in June of that year, so 2 months prior. I had reached out to my friend Lizzie Villarreal, who was on this podcast. She's a great writer, great friend from USC. And I said, hey, I'm looking for a job. Do you know any assistant jobs? She's like, oh, my friend, she knows that Ava DuVernay is looking for an assistant for A Wrinkle in Time. And she's like, are you interested? I said, okay, yeah, let's do it. Like, so she put me up for the job. I got a meeting. I walk into Ava DuVernay's office and I see all the concept work, the artwork for A Wrinkle in Time. And she just starts interviewing me and I'm in awe. Of course, it's Ava DuVernay. And she looks at my resume and she's like, oh, you're a writer. And in my head, I was like, oh, I'm this job. Because she was looking for an assistant and she's the director. So I guess she wanted someone who wanted to be a director. And she said, well, why do you want this job? It's for, a path for a director. And I said, I forgot what I said, but I just knew I wasn't getting that job. Like, when you're going to get a job, you feel the energy, Needless to say, I didn't get the job. But she had said, you should be writing. And you should be writing 24/7 to get on the show. And then if you want to direct, then you can, shadow on that TV show and then get an episode as a director. And so I left that meeting. It's like, yeah, I should be writing, but what should I be writing? I didn't know what else to write. I had finished my pilot from NHMC. That's the one that got me staffed. However, I looked at it and said, oh, actually, I can fix the storyline and make it a little bit better. And the time that I was thinking of what to write next, I went back to my pilot and fixed the storyline and I made it stronger. And that's the same pilot, new and improved, that I submitted to NBC to get staffed on Blacklist when they asked for it. So I think had I not had that meeting, Ava DuVernay and her saying, you should be writing, and me going back and fixing it to make it stronger, I wouldn't have gotten that job on Blacklist Redemption because I would have given them a script that wasn't up to par. And so I think Ava DuVernay had a big part to play in me being staffed. And then, of course, when friends back home hear about the story, they want to have you interviewed in the town's newspaper. And so I was. And then my friend was on Queen Sugar. And I told her about it, and she said, "Give it to me. Let me email it to Ava." And so she did, and she emailed it to her on a Wednesday. And that Saturday, I bumped into Ava DuVernay at a Hollywood event for the Deadline Contenders event. And I said, "Oh, I'm actually so and so's friend. You know, you said no to me as your assistant, but I got staff." And she's like, looked at me and she said, "Yeah, oh my God." And she gave me a big old hug, squeezed me in front of everyone. So those little tidbits are,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so, like, let's talk about Blacklist Redemption. It was a spinoff of, the hit show
right.
Blacklist on NBC.
It
And
didn't become
so,
a hit.
unfortunately,
No.
So, but I am curious of what you learned from your time there, because again, I think a lot of writers can't wait to be staffed and be in the room. And then what is the actual reality of that? What were the things you didn't know? What were the things that surprised you, especially being like a first time writer? Like, did you know what the hell you were doing?
I had an idea because I would ask writers to coffee and I would ask them, how does a writer's room work? So I sort of knew what to do and what not to do, especially reading the room and being that support staff for the upper levels. I need to volunteer to card the episode. I have good penmanship, so I'm always told to write things for people. So I was like, okay, that's going to be my strong suit. I knew when to not talk and when to talk and not point out problems without having to. So I think I was pretty prepared going in. The thing that I wish I would have known was not all staff writers get an episode or the chance to write, and I didn't, and I was very heartbroken. But then other people explain, like, just because you're a staff writer doesn't automatically mean you're going to get an episode or a chance to write. And so after they explain how things work, like, oh, okay.
The Blacklist did come to an end, Redemption. So I'm curious of like, what did you do after it? You have the first job, which is hard, but a lot of people say getting the second job is equally as hard.
I ended up taking the workshop classes because I wanted to be the strongest and the best writer I could be. And if I were to not get a job, I would know it's because of politics and not because not being a good writer. Right after, I was paired up with another writer and we went out and we started pitching a legal show. We got a lot of interest from different production companies, and then we ended up at the Mark Gordon Company. He produces Grey's Anatomy and a lot of other TV shows and movies. So we were getting such good vibes from his people as we were pitching. They kept on nodding their head and saying, "Oh my God, that's great. We love it. Perfect." And we got to the part of the pitch where they started asking us questions about the series. And the first question out of the exec's mouth was, "What do you see for your first case for the pilot?" The other writer and I had talked about it, but we never settled on that case. And so I just panicked and said, "We were thinking about a murder investigation." And then the other writer said that, or we were thinking about, I forgot what he said, but he said a different type of case of the. And so that told the exec that I guess we didn't know our own show. So we ended up finding out through our agent later that we would have sold the pitch had we given them one answer for the case of the week for the pilot. So a lot of pitching, a lot of writing new material in between those two jobs.
Yeah. And so, that brings us to Selena, the series. So how did you get that job? And like, how did you feel about like tackling this like iconic story?
Got the job by submitting my sample, the same one for Blacklist Redemption, to Moises Zamora, the showrunner, who is a friend, who is the founder of Clubhouse. I sent it and didn't think twice about it. I said to myself, if it's meant for me, it's meant for me. A couple of weeks later, I get the call saying that they wanted to hire me. And I was just like on cloud nine because it's Selena. It's a big property. It's just Selena.
Yeah.
And it was such a personal thing for me because I mentioned when I got to high school, my Spanish teacher would use her song to teach us Spanish and the verbs. So, she would print out the lyrics, she would omit the verb, and we would have to conjugate it and pick the right conjugation to put back in the song we would have to sing the song or write out the song for her. So I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe going from high school Spanish class, learning Spanish with her lyrics, to meeting her family and having a say in telling her story. Because never in a million years did you think there was ever going to be a series about Selena, because the movie was so iconic and it's like done, like the story's done. But just being in the room and knowing that we were going to dive deeper into things that the fans didn't know, like how certain songs came about, why certain things in Selena's life happened, and we were being told everything by Suzette in person. Like that's the closest thing you would ever get to Selena, her own flesh and blood. And it was just such a beautiful room. It was all Latino writers. We knew we were doing something special. We knew we were doing something big and that the whole world was waiting to. We were just like ready and excited and nervous and all that. And just going to the room every day, I just knew everyone in the room was supportive of each other. And I learned how to pitch episodes. There were times where I was left in the room with, as an executive story editor, I was left in the room with the four staff writers, and I had to like take the reins at times. They're like, okay, well, where are we at? And I'm like, oh, now I have to like repitch the episode for them to remind them. And we would work on fleshing out the episode. And then at the end of the day, Moises and Gio, our other showrunner, would come in, and being the most senior writer, I would have to like pitch them the episode, and I'm just standing there like, okay, this is what we think we should do. And I was just like on cloud nine. Like in our room, we had windows that looked out into Hollywood or Los Angeles. So I'm just like standing in the middle of it all.
Yeah, and I believe you got an episode, right? Like you finally got it.
Yes. The first season, I got to co-write an episode with Pamela Garcia Rooney, and it was just so amazing. It was the love episode where Selena and Chris start falling in love. They meet and they fall in love. So we knew that eyes were going to be on that episode. I mean, eyes were going to be on every episode, the love story episode. And then second season, I got another episode on my own. And I was just like, wow, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Moises and Netflix and Campanario. So, yeah.
What have you been up to since Selena? Because, the writer's room was like a while back. Like I don't think people realize how long ago it had been written.
Yeah, I've been busy. I actually met Ricardo Chavira, who plays our Abraham. And I met him before Selena, a play of his. And I was like, that's our Abraham. I just knew it. And when people were throwing out names for Abraham, like, is it Ricardo Chavira? Y'all, it's Ricardo Chavira. And they're like, no, it's not him. And then we saw his audition, and they were like blown away by it. And I was like, see, I told you. And they're like, and he ended up being our Abraham, did an amazing job. And so I've been talking with him. We have some ideas for projects. I've started a new pilot, sort of like a Succession meets Billions, but with the Latino family, real estate world, rich and powerful. And fingers crossed, waiting on a job offer that looks promising. And just reading a lot of pilots and starting to put together some ideas for my own production company.
I'm curious about your own storytelling. So like sometimes as writers, we tell the same story over and over. So I'm just curious if you see like themes or you see a through line through all your scripts. Like what's attractive to you in storytelling? What do you like to do?
The theme that always finds itself popping up in my writing is like the duality of belonging to two different worlds without fully belonging in one. That's what always in my writing in some way, shape, or form. And, being locked down in COVID, I've been part of Shira Piven's weekly Zoom writers group. She's Adam McKay's wife, Jeremy Piven's sister. So she leads like these time writing for us to explore themes of identity and psyche. So a lot of stuff that has come out of those weekly writing, I've come to realize that it's that duality. It's always the foundation of my writing, of my pilots. Again, going back to being raised Mormon, It's like, and also being gay, that's like the biggest way that I'm always having to navigate that.
I'm always curious about people that don't fit like the stereotype. And,
Right.
because I think as like Mexicans, we get a lot of things assigned to us. So what's it like living with something that maybe is not like super top of mind for people when they like meet you?
Born into the Mormon church and also being gay, because being gay in the Mormon church is a big no-no. But for me, I mean, I stopped going to church when I was like 18, and it sort of became more of a spiritual thing for me. A lot of people don't know that the Mormon church is sort of being more accepting of their gay members. And so, yeah, that's the one thing people are always shocked to find out about me. Leads my general meetings. They're like, well, how is that possible? And I'm like, well, ask my grandma. She's the one that converted the whole family in the 70s.
So you also mentioned that you were part of Clubhouse, not the app, but like a Latinx, queer Latinx writers group. So I'm just curious if you could sort of tell us what it's about, but also like why were you called to be part of this group?
Yes, Clubhouse was started by Moises Zamora and it's from the app. And it's a group of gay Latino writers in Hollywood. We uplift each other, we support each other in all aspects. When we hear of jobs in rooms that we might not be good for, we always look to the other writers in the Clubhouse and say, hey, this comedy is looking for upper levels. I'm not a comedy writer. You are. Reach out, have your reps send your sample, and let's get you in that show. We read each other's work. We provide notes. We always go to events with each other. And I was there when Moises said that he was going to start it. It's been life-changing for me. He really gave me the opportunity with Selena to propel in the industry, and I'm forever grateful for that.
I always like to ask my guests who are the writers that they're a fan of. So who are the writers that, these could be heroes, peers, friends, people you creep on Instagram who don't know who you are, but you're obsessed with their work. So who are some of those people for you?
Stephen Canals from Pose, Lindsay Villarreal, Yelena de Leon, Claudia Foresteri, Liz Rivera, Eugene Garcia Cross. And for the non-Latino writers, I love Danny Strong, Melissa Rosenberg, Chandra Rhimes, and McKay.
And so where can people follow you on social media?
I am at Jorge is Writing on Instagram and Twitter.
I like to ask my guests to help me title the episode. The prompt is a blank Latinx writer, and you can put as many words as you want. You can mix all around. It could be Latino, Latina, Latine. I also use it as a community building tool so that when people see the title, they can be like, oh, there's another writer like me out there.
A Virgo magic wielding Latinx writer.
Perfect. Says it all.
Yes.
And with that, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. I had such a good time. It was so great talking to you.
Thank you so much, Ruben, for having me. I had a great time. I had so much fun, and I hope to hear more episodes.